Hello again, everybody. Thank you for being with us today. I'm Allie Russell. I'm the marketing coordinator for the Utah Film Commission, and welcome to episode 2 in our webinar series, The Breakdown. This is Film Day Online. As some of you probably know, our office, we host Film Day on the Hill every year, and usually you have to be at the Capitol before the sun comes up. So very glad that we did not have to venture into the snow this morning. There's a positive. But since we won't be having an in-person film day this year, we wanted to take this virtual opportunity to share information about Utah's motion picture incentive program. But before I turn it over to Virginia and Derek to tell you more, we're going to go over some housekeeping topics. So first, feel free to adjust your name. As you can see, mine has Utah Film Commission after it. Feel free to add job, department, school, organization, company. We also received some really great questions from the registration page, so thank you for sending those. If you have further questions throughout the webinar, feel free to use the chat feature. We'll be checking that throughout, and we'll try to answer as many questions as we can. And let's see, after our Q&A, we'll have a chance to answer some of your questions, but stick around after for the breakout session, and you can join to listen to the Motion Picture Association of Utah. And finally, we have some poll questions that will pop up throughout the webinar. So please answer them. When you see them, you'll have about 30 seconds before they disappear. So with that, Melissa, will you please share the first poll question? Yes, what is your current role in the film industry in Utah?
Don't be shy.
Don't be shy. We need as many answers as we can get. Perfect. And with this, I will throw it off to Virginia and Derek to discuss the incentive program.
Thank you, Allie. And so nice to see. I'm trying to scroll through all my pages and see all of your faces. And it is so funny that Allie said that about the film day. I don't know how many of you have come in the past, but this would have been a doozy of a day to try to be up there at 6 a.m. So I'm very happy that this is online, even though I do miss seeing all of you in person. So we wanted to talk a little bit about just how the incentive works and get into some more detail about our program. As most of you know, the Film Commission markets the entire state of Utah for film, television, commercial production. We foster the development of our local talent and crew. We promote our locations, our industry businesses, and of course, we run the Motion Picture Incentive Program. We are a state agency, meaning that we report to the governor. So we are part of the Utah Office of Tourism, and we both report up to the governor's Office of Economic Development. The GOED board, the governor's office's board, approves all of our incentives. So we work very closely with them to make sure that they know the impact that film has on our state. And then we serve a variety of people in the state, as you can see by this chart. We thought it'd be good for you to see kind of all of our constituents that we talk to on a regular basis. So I want to talk a little bit about just the history of incentives, because I think I'm just going to go a tiny bit into the background because I think it's important to know how it all got started. And for those of you who've been in the industry a long time, you will remember some of these things that I'm talking about. But back in the late 90s, it started when Canada actually created an incentive program to lure productions from California. So their program worked really well, and other states realized that they could also create a program to create some of that economic impact in their own state. So Louisiana was the first state to pass legislation in 2001, and other states quickly followed. Utah legislators saw that we were losing productions to other states. So before incentives, obviously filmmakers just went where they felt like going and wanted to, go to the location where they felt like it fit the script the best. And once there were incentives starting to be offered, that really had an impact. As again, some of you may know, the late 90s and early 2000s were big ones for Utah, with multiple national television series and films. I think when I pulled the numbers in 1999, the economic impact of film was close to 200 million, which is quite a bit more than we've seen in the last few years, mostly because, again, there wasn't an incentives game around the country. So beginning in 2004, the legislators started to play around with this idea. They allocated $1 million in 1 year and just kind of took it a year at a time to see what would happen. And this continued until 2011, when they passed our current legislation, which allows us an annual amount of 6.79 million. So that is our cap. We get that every year. There's no sunset for the program. It's an ongoing appropriation. As well as that tax credit program that we have that's part of our law, the legislature has also passed several appropriations for a cash rebate program. And again, some of you may know that, some of the smaller productions have been really helped by this cash rebate program. And we were able to carve out funds specifically for local smaller productions. And we're going to talk a little more about those two sides of the program a little bit later. So since 2011, so the past 10 years, we've had this program, and it's been a good, solid program. We've done a lot with it, but just for perspective, I wanted to show you where we sit with other programs. So again, we have 6.79 in ongoing funds and tax credit, and $1 million to $1.5 million in cash. So we kind of look at it as a little over $8 million a year. So these are some of our main competitors. We'll get calls, Derek gets calls. They say, hey, we're looking at you or Vancouver, or we're looking at New Mexico or Utah. Like, what can you tell us? How do you sell Utah for us? But when you look at the amounts of the incentive that they're playing with, New Mexico has, actually $110 million in incentives. Texas has 32. Montana, as we know, passed a new program last year of $10 million. So just for perspective, Georgia and Canada have no cap. So they can approve as much as they see fit in a given year. So 38 states and territories and many countries have some kind of film incentive program, and incentives have really become a part of doing business. It's not extra money that goes to production companies, it's part of the budget. And that's why it's become such a necessity for states. If we don't have an incentive program, you don't have a film program. So just I want to talk a little bit too about when the legislators in 2011 passed this statute to create the program. Their goals were these three things, and they put it in the statute right at the beginning. The objectives of this legislation is to encourage production in the state, to provide incentives so that Utah can compete successfully with other states, because that's what they were seeing. As I think I told you, in the late 1990s, we had $200 million of production. At our low point in about 2007, it was about 25 million. So you can see the difference when, we didn't have an incentive program, really everything left. So that was part of the goal, is to be able to compete with other markets and to develop a strong motion picture industry that really can contribute to improving the state's economy. So that kind of gives you the setup of how we got where we are, how we fit in. So our job as the Film Commission is to manage this program. So state agency takes what the legislature gives them and manages it to the best of our ability. And Derek, I'm going to pass it to you to talk a little bit about our incentive programs.
Thanks, Virginia. So Utah has two incentive programs. We have the Motion Picture Incentive Program, or MPIP as we call it, which offers a baseline incentive of 20% back for films with Utah qualified spend of $500,000 and up. We've had this program in its current state since 2011. A good example of a project that takes advantage of this is the Disney Plus series, High School Musical, the series. Productions with Utah spend of in excess of $1 million must hire 75% local or shoot 75% of days in a rural area to receive an additional 5%. We also have the Community Film Incentive Program, or the CFIP as we call it. It's meant to foster local filmmakers. This program offers up to 20% back on Utah spend for films with a local above the line tie and budgets between $20,000 up to $500,000. With the Community Film Incentive Program, besides having that Utah above the line tie, the productions must hire 85% local cast and crew and have at least one key crew position going to someone who hasn't been in that position before. I think there was a question that someone submitted asking about how we get more locals working on set. As you can see, the Utah cast and crew hire requirement does encourage the production to hire a higher percentage of Utah residents. In fact, Utah has one of the highest requirements for any other incentive program. And I'd also argue that the incentive works as an incentive. You know, it makes more sense to hire someone locally, get money back on their wages paid than it does to travel someone here, put them up, pay them per diems. So between the incentive program, you know, they're encouraged to hire a Utah crew. Melissa, would you mind launching the poll? Have you worked on an incentive project that's received an incentive?
And I'm hoping that you all know if you have or not, which is why we put this list up, because I hope, and maybe this will help, that if you don't know, then, you know, there is a reason why you're getting a job that the legislature actually created a program for.
Now I'd like to talk to the process of getting approved for an incentive. Works like this. So first of all, there's the application. We have monthly application deadlines. Productions must apply for the program before they start spending money in Utah. Commercials, news, and projects not meant for commercial distribution are not eligible for an incentive. And at time of application, you must have all of your funding in place. Then there's the application review and approval. Approved projects must meet certain criteria, including amount of Utah spend, the number of local jobs, local wages created, and whether or not the project needs an incentive. Meaning some projects are here firmly because the nature of their show has to do with the subjects that live here. And sometimes we're not as keen with a smaller incentive program of providing incentive for those types of projects. The incentives are post-performance, meaning that we don't pay out until the production spending is audited by a local independent CPA, and we only pay out on the verified qualified Utah spend, which means the expenditures paid by the production company that are of benefit to a Utah tax-paying entity and subject to either sales and use, income, or corporate tax.
Hey, Derek, we got a really good question from Jerry. Could you explain the part that required a local key role to be hired that wasn't in such a position before? He missed part of that. So the CFI.
Oh, yeah. So that's a new, that's a requirement of the Community Film Incentive Program. We kind of affectionately call it our leg up. A project that's approved for the CFIP has to put someone in some department as a department head. So it can be any of the main 13 departments. In that position, they have to be working in that position for that type of project for the first time. So if somebody is, say for instance, they've been a second AD, but they've never been a first AD. Or if someone has been a captain for the transportation department, but they've never been a transportation coordinator or head of makeup, or it can be any of those positions.
Compliment them on that. Thank you so much. That was actually my question. This is Jerry, but I appreciate you.
Hey, Jerry.
Yeah, thank you. We like that as upcoming filmmakers, that ability to be promoted. So we really do appreciate that part of the incentive. Thanks.
I think it's a great idea that we put that in there, and it seems to give people a chance, that otherwise may not have. So
absolutely. We have another question from Brooke that I'll throw to you in Virginia. about the rural requirement for community incentive?
Yeah, I'd be happy to speak to that. There are two ways that a motion picture incentive production project can qualify for the additional 5%. One is that they hire 75% Utah casting crew, also only available for projects that spend $1 million or more in the state. The other way they can get there is by filming 75% of their principal photography while in Utah in a rural county. The 4 counties that we don't count as rural are Weber to the north, Davis to the north, Salt Lake, and Utah County. They film outside of those counties for 75% of their principal photography. They can qualify for the additional 5%.
And also, Derek, just to jump in, I don't know if this is what Brooke meant. There isn't a specific requirement for the community film incentive program for rural. It just is, it is what it is.
Correct. Yeah, they have to be part of the motion picture incentive program and spend $1 million in order to qualify for the additional 5.
Cool. Thank you.
Excellent. Should we go to the next slide? Or do you have another question, Ellie?
No, please.
So as Virginia mentioned earlier, we do have a really great program. It's a good and stable one. And Utah remains very competitive in the industry. This is thanks to our iconic locations, our proximity to LA, our amazing professional crew base and cast, and other local film related resources like the sound stages that we have here, our grip and electric equipment vendors, our star trailers and other transportation vehicles, camera houses. You know, a state like Montana, which we mentioned before, they may be able to offer a larger incentive, but it will take them a number of years to build up the crew and infrastructure to be as competitive as we are on a larger scale. Most productions who come into the state want to know that they can source the majority of their crew and equipment locally. It's costly to travel and house crew and bring in equipment. Our program allows us to to support between 15 to 25 productions a year. And that's a healthy mix of productions that originate both in and out of state. We do, everything from documentaries, TV and streaming series, independent studio features. So I'm going to turn it back over to Virginia. Do you want to talk a little bit more about the economic impact?
First, I'm going to unmute myself. Okay. I'm going to try to talk numbers because I know this comes up for a lot of people. So as I've said, the program has a little over $8 million annually. These funds get replenished on July 1st and they roll over year to year if we don't use them, which has in the past allowed us to be a little creative about how we allocate the funds over a multi-year period. But that isn't always the case. But if you look at this chart, so in fiscal year 2018, the blue line represents the total incentives awarded. So obviously that's more than the 8 million, which means that in years past, we had money that continued to roll over. So that was how we were able to jumpstart some of the bigger projects back in 2016, 2017, is that we had some leftover funds from the year. But then you can see 2019, we used almost all of the funds that we had and just rolled over a little bit. In 2020, we just are with the, little under $8 million that we've spent. So, you can also see how much productions are spending across the state in comparison to how much incentives is being awarded. And then also the red line in here is what they're spending in rural Utah. And that's a big part of where we see the benefits of economic impact in film, is that it's an immediate infusion into rural communities. And as we all know, $1 million spent in somewhere like Kanab goes much further than $1 million spent on the Wasatch Front. So, Derek does an amazing job of every time a film production comes in, we try to talk about, is there a way to get off the Wasatch Front for some of this? Obviously it doesn't make sense for every film, but we do try to steer people that way if we can, because we just can see the benefits so quickly. So again, our program has been an amazing success over the past 10 years. We've been able to support almost 200 projects over those 10 years, many of which were produced by local filmmakers at lower budget levels. So that's something that I felt like we wanted to make sure you knew, because I think there's a lot of perception that, all of this money is going out of state. It's really just for the High School Musicals and the Yellowstones. And, but it really is, of 192 total projects, 117 of those were local. That was, created and delivered by a local production agency or local production company. And then 116 of those projects were actually at the under $1 million spend. So, and that's another big thing of what we tell the governor's office and legislators is that, we have to have all of those kinds of projects. It's just like we want to do the jump, the leg up program for the community film, is that you can't, as an emerging crew member or cast member, you can't jump right into a High School Musical or Yellowstone. You've got to have some credits before you get there. And so if we don't have those smaller projects, it's harder for people to work their way up. So it's all part of that infrastructure and that flow. We like to see a variety of kinds of projects. So that puts us at where we are now, 10 years later. And really the challenge is that demand now exceeds supply. So the annual amount hasn't changed since 2011, and yet the industry itself in Utah has more than doubled. When you look at our overall wages in the film industry, our overall number of jobs, the taxable sales created by vendors in this industry have more than doubled, but we have not changed the incentive program. So that's where we're a little bit stuck. We've had more than double the amount of incentive requests that we have funding for in 21 and 22. And when we look at sort of where does that put us, it's about obviously the economic impact of things that we might lose. When Derek and I total kind of where we are with productions who would like to shoot here, but we don't have the funds for it, it's about 75 million. It's also industry reputation. I think we've talked to a lot of you about this, where, the more we say no, the more production companies get used to hearing that and take Utah off the list, just even as a non-starter. So we don't even know the calculation of the calls that we're not getting because they don't think that we have money to begin with. And then where it's about 1,200 jobs that we calculate as part of, again, the inquiries that we're not able to fulfill this year. So that's where we are. And I know we have a couple of board members on from the Motion Picture Association of Utah. And again, just to clarify, where everyone fits in their roles, we report to the governor, which means that if the governor has a project or a program, then we help fulfill that program. And this year we have a brand new governor. So any kind of increase to the incentive would come through the legislature, because the governor hasn't had a chance to create his own goals for this year. That's something we're going to definitely be talking to him about in the next fiscal year. And so any request to the legislature can't come from a state agency. That has to come from the industry. And that's where the Motion Picture Association comes in. They're really the advocacy arm. They represent all of you so that you can get your voice heard up on the Hill.
So I guess we can jump into the breakout session. So you should see shortly a pop-up and you can click join, or you can be done. And if you have further questions after all of this is said and done, please email us film@utah.gov. We're always here to answer your questions.